Get high, get lit, get drunk, get wavy, get wavy. Get high, get lit, get drunk, get wavy.
So hey, we're CLiQ. Welcome to our studio up in North London. We're here with Computer Music to talk about our track Wavy. So Wavy is actually the first record that Max and I, Robin, put together. Started off the beat, I suppose. It started off a bass line with some drums. And then it kind of sat on our hard drive for a month or two, I suppose. We didn't really know what to do with it. We were driving at one stage to a friend's party in Croydon. It's like a rooftop party with a couple of other friends, and we played the track in the car, and a friend of mine started humming out a little melody, so to speak, which ended up becoming the chorus of Wavy, the get lit, get drunk, get high, get wavy. So props out to Herbie Critchlow on that one. But we didn't think much of it after that. We thought it was a good vibe, but we kind of even forgotten about how that was done or whatever the case might be. And then about a month after that, we went to one of these music industry party event things and bumped into Alika. First time we ever met Alika, and her energy was really nice and we really liked her. So within about 5 minutes of talking to her, we sent her the instrumental of Wavy As You Hear Now. And she put the verses down and she came up with a different chorus. And when we got it back, we were like, okay, this record's definitely got some legs. So we actually were here in the studio, and we rang up Herbie out of the blue just for a catch-up conversation, and we were talking to him about it, and he was like, what about what we did in the car? So he voice noted it, sent it over to us. We put it on the record. Everything gelled, it made sense. We called Alika, got straight down to the studio, did the record, sent it off to the management, and Wavy was born. That's how Wavy actually came together. Did I miss anything there?
No, that's pretty detailed.
Detailed?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, as you can see here, we are doing most things in the box. We have a collaboration of different kind of computers. So we use Macs, but I work on Logic and Ableton, and Max is locked into Pro Tools, as much as I try to convince him out of it, but he won't budge. And then we've got some cool little speakers. I mean, we've got the little Jennies. They're great for writing on. We use these great Adams from the S3Hs, I believe. They're great for monitoring on, getting a good mix. We've actually mastered a couple of things on them as well, I think.
Yeah.
Some of the remixes and stuff.
Yeah.
We like everything to be quite vibey, so we are running a big Adams sub, a 10-inch sub, but we also have the sub for the Jennies. So it's a very boomy little room, but it definitely creates a lot of vibe. For recording, we're using a Neumann U87 mic. I think it's probably one of the best mics on the market. A bit of an all-rounder, does a bit of everything. And then we're using Apollo for our sound cards. We've got an Apollo 6 and a twin sort of daisy chain together. So that's kind of our setup in here. Besides the array of plugins.
Yeah, and we literally run everything in the box basically. So it's literally laptop. I can go home and continue working. Just like Robin can, we have the sessions and then boom, plug it in here, and you continue working. So it's very handy. Back in the day, you had a lot more. I mean, still many studios to do a lot of outboard gear, but we chosen to work within the computer. So it's very compact, system. So basically what we do as well, I mean, even if everything, the final production is actually made on Pro Tools, when we, bouncing ideas back and forward, you sit on Logic, we open Ableton, we can, do a lot of creative work on other platforms, so very, Ableton in particular is very quick into just drag and drop, vibes and loops and this and that to get things going. Logic is somewhere in between Tools and Ableton, I found, and then Tools is quite limited when it comes to the creative side, but when it comes to editing, mixing and arranging, I find Pro Tools a very good platform. So if you have the luxury to bounce between all of them, it's great, but this is how we do it.
I think if Ableton had the mixing screen that Logic and Pro Tools had, and had the recording loop function for vocals that Logic
runs, that's great. Yeah.
I think if you had one door that had all of it, we'd probably end up there. with the good finish mix that you get out of Pro Tools. But yeah, like you said, Ableton's great just to get quick ideas in, and then if we like the idea, we'll take it over to Logic and get the vocals recorded, and then export it out to Tools at the end for the final mix. Because I think the end product coming out of Tools is the best.
It's a bit, it's a lot of work to do, but it's worth it, and it's actually, I think from a creative point of view, it's quite good to go through each stages as well, that you have different work environments, so your brain kind of works differently, I mean, many people found their best way to do, but, for us, this kind of tend to work. All right, guys, so this is our session of Wavy. We're running a Pro Tools on a Mac, so it's the 2019.5, which is the latest version, and we're running an 8-core MacBook Pro with 32 gigs of RAM. Pro Tools is fairly old school programs. Not many house producers out there probably use Pro Tools. We do use Ableton and Logic as well as, but from a mixing, editing and arrangement, we work mainly in Pro Tools. So this is what you guys are seeing right now. So what we do is we always start with the drums at the very top and then kind of work ourselves down to effects, crashes and swishes and whatnot, and then strings and music, and then bass lines, and then into the vocals. So everything is kind of lined up, and every session we do is pretty much the same. We always start with a kick at the very top, and then, as I said, drums all the way down to the vocals at the very end, and the master and the buses and whatnot. So the kick we use, we have quite a big library with hits and kicks and crashes and hi-hats and claps and whatnot. We don't use, not many people use samples to play back all the sounds, but we put it straight into the session itself. So each kick is actually played from audio straight out of the Pro Tools session. So as you can see here, it all goes in blocks of 2 bars. I mean, you can do it anything. I just consolidated it together for 2 bars. But we actually start the session with just adding 1 kick straight from the library into the session, and then we kind of put it together sound by sound. So it's a bit, time consuming, but I think it sounds tighter because you can literally go in on the sample here. Is very, very tight. We found sometimes playing from MIDI, he kind of has his own little swing, which, some cases, especially with kicks, is not great. So I find the kick is always very, very tight on playing back from audio straight from Pro Tools. So here we got a kick, and now these days when you take kicks from sample libraries or you create your own kick or whatnot, they tend to be quite processed. A few years back, where you were combining 3-4 kicks to create 1 good kick. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. You have such a big selection of kicks. They sound great out of the box. So we kind of narrow it down. We got maybe 4 or 5 kicks that we kind of tend to go back to and use on a regular basis because they just sound good. I mean, we've been playing it out on clubs and when we've been touring and whatnot, and it just sounds good. So what kicks are good for the dance floor, basically. So this is the end kick, which we use. We just named it end kick for the sake of it, and that's it. And then we move on to, we use a plugin on this kick. To be fair, we only use a small EQ. It's from MCDSP. It's called Filter Bank. And it's been around for years, but it's just a very good sounding filter. Both low and high pass, very, very basic, up to 24-bit, and it cuts literally from the top all the way down. It's very basic, but very efficient and sounds very warm and very nice. So we're just cutting just a touch on just low, kind of mid-30s, just to have that kind of very, very low rumble, doesn't cut through and spoils the mix on the very, very bottom end. And then we have like a little tom that we've been playing from it's like basically an 808 and 909 replica. It's called Boom. And is by Air. It's a German company, And it used to be only by Pro Tools, but now there's, it's cross platforms. Now you can find it for VST, audio units, and any platform out there can take it basically. And it's just like a drum machine. You have the step sequencer that you can program internally, or you can play it by MIDI. So all the blue things here, information you see here is MIDI information basically. And we kind of mix them up a little bit with the kick and the drums tend to be mainly audio. And then some of the bass lines and some of the kind of toms and whatnot, they are on MIDI. And this is the tom that we selected. This is just an 808 high tom that we've been selected, and it's just got that really nice 808 kind of sound to it. And you can select the decay to have the decay, obviously the tune to tune it to the track, and the volume. And it's very, very basic and a bit panning. But it's quite basic plugin, but it's just got everything you need. And to get that kind of nice warm punch to it, we run it through a compressor. It's called Smack. You can technically do any compressor because there's nothing special about this. It's just got a very quick attack time, and that's why. And it just sounds very nice, squashed. So if you take that sound, you can see it's compressing around 10 dB, which is not a crazy amount. But what's making most of the work is this decapitator by Sound Toys. Again, available for all platforms. And it's a great little machine. I use this a lot, especially working with a lot of digital gear. Everything tends to be very clean and polished. And what this does just adds great saturation to your signal, and adds nice warm adds like an harmonic distortion to your sound, which just adds a lot of character. So if you play the sound without it, for instance, just you have the very standard 808 tom kind of sound to it, but as soon as you add that decapitator, just pulls out brings out all the tones and the sound from the source. And you've got a bit of drive, low cut, the tone, you can really tune it into, what kind of darkness or brightness you want, a bit of high cut and output, and the actual mix. And you've got different kind of styles to the distortion, different characters to the thing that you can flick through until you find, a distortion that fits into whatever you're producing. But again, we use this on a lot of things, on drums to vocals and all sorts, to just give that dirty feel to it. So that's tom. And then here we use that's a sound that we bounced already. Is again another tom, and it's being compressed. We use a lot of compression, and we tend to use this compressor, Smack. Unfortunately, only available for Pro Tools, but is nothing special about this. You can find many other Logic or Ableton plugins that will sound very, very similar. And then we do a bit of cutoff on the EQ. We've got a Sony Oxford EQ. Not much happening here apart from 3.7 dB down on 100 hertz. So it's just to kind of poke out that the kind of frequency down in the mix. Then we got a reverb. I tend to put a lot of reverb, an ambient reverb on drums to kind of give them in different dimensions in the mix, while the kick being very prominent and forward in the mix. Then you've got like hi-hats or toms that you try to put in different aspects or different kind of worlds within the mix, so they don't fight with each other. So we got this tom with a bit of ambient, and that kind of gives it a bit of a nice room. It's a short room to it. It just removes the space for the kick, so it doesn't kind of fight on that. Oops, a bit too quick. So we're just going to put these three sounds that we've been playing around with together. And those sounds are quite distinctive when you hear the wavy. I don't know if you guys heard the wavy track, but if you hear that track, instantly you recognize these sounds basically. And that's how they work together. And then moving on to the claps. As I said to you before, claps, we don't need to process that much these days because, as I said, they sound so good out of the box. but we used two claps and one snare to give that clap sound that we have. So you see actually one of the claps is almost a bit further actually than the other claps. So you have few samples coming out before the actual clap happens on the grid. So we have about 74 samples before to give that kind of lazy clap effect kind of thing. So it's almost like, yeah, you almost got that kind of little latency going on to give that kind of groove to the clap. So the actual hit itself almost happens slightly earlier than the actual grid. But the actual processing on them, a little bit of cutoff, nothing too special, 24 dB, cutting out 180 to lose literally all the bottom end from it. A nice little poke on the head from the BF3, but this is literally a plugin that you've got for Logic as well, which I think is called, you got the CLA 2. So it's literally, we got waves to use Apollo, both Twin and the X6 with the DSP. So we got literally the Waves one, the Protos one, and the Apollo's audio unit plugins as well. But I tend to use the Protos. It's literally just a nice little tap on the head, basically. Just a 3-4 dB, just to kind of push everything down a touch to make room for everything else. Okay, so that's the two claps, and then moving on to the snare. Again, compression, a bit of room reverb. So I'm using ambient medium with a 351 millisecond, a very, very narrow mix. So it's just a bare 8%. So obviously mostly original and a bit of wet there. So it's not much at all. But all these small details in the bigger picture makes a big difference than when you're all adding up in the mix together with everything else. And then moving on from the clap, snare, and the kick, we've got a hi-hat, open hi-hat. I think it's just a box standard. It's just an old good old 909, a bit processed 909, and then we got it together with another hat together. And I always tend to brighten things up a little bit, and this is a really, really good EQ made by Plugin Alliance. It's MAG. I mean, it's been around for a few years, and it's actually a replica of an existing little EQ, and it's very, very good because it's got a very particular sound on the high end. So it's got something called the air band, and it goes all the way up to 40,000 hertz. Obviously down to 2.5, which, you know, very rarely I use. It's mainly between 10 and 40,000. And obviously over 20,000, it's you know, practically impossible to hear, but it just gives, and as they said, air. And it's just add that kind of, you know, space or air, whatever you want to call it, to the mix. And it's just, it's a kind of emulation of the old school. When you recorded in the old recording studios, they have a lot of vintage gear, and all they had is all tube valves that were giving these kind of, not on purpose, but you know, there was the technology that was around then, and it gave a lot of kind of added harmonics that you don't get with the modern technology, especially working in software like this. And that just brings that kind of air to the frequencies, and it's just, I'm gonna see if you guys can hear it. If you listen to a laptop or headphones, it might be a bit difficult, but you probably can. If I it just adds obviously a lot of brightness to it, but it adds some kind of as I call sparkle to the very top frequency. And for me, that's, you know, many big SSL studios out there have that on their EQs, and just gives that expensive flavor to it. And then moving further on, you know, this session, the drums are very, very, very sparse. We don't have much drums at all going on. It's like the kick drum, obviously the toms from the 808, clap, and the hi-hats, and a few effect sounds like, you know, kind of shuffly snares, like kind of house snares, that you're just kind of doing a bit of shuffling going on. I tend to use now it's all consolidated, but as you can see on the grid, there's not exactly on the grid. You got a bit of a skipping going on there to give a bit of groove. And we use a built-in thing called beat detective that detects the beat. You analyze it, and you can separate. This is before we put in the session, and you can convert to the groove. So I think in this particular session we use an MPC with a 58% swing. So what it does, in the old MPC drum machines, they had a built-in swing that many hip hop and R&B producers were using to give that kind of shuffle to drums. And I tend to go to between 58 and 54% swing, because it gives them that little shuffle. It doesn't become too sterile or too stiff, basically. And we use that, and that literally just, you can shuffle it, move it around in the session, basically, and that just gives it really, really nice swing. Let's see, I think that's exactly how we swing into the grid. And then, as you can see, it's completely off the grid, but it gives nice little feel. And I think Cubase and Logic and all these have different swings. I don't know if they got an MPC as such, but they got their own swing. You can probably play around and find your own little groove until it feels good. Later in the session, we got some bass hits. Everything obviously is consolidated now, so it looks very, very nice and tidy. But when we're working, everything is kind of a bit rough, and all these have their own edit points, so everything looks like that kind of thing, before we start, and we kind of map it out and put it in place, and then we consolidate and make it look nice and tidy. And the same thing, we've got a few bass hits that goes together with those drums, so it adds a nice little kind of swing to it. The same with here. And this is all kind of bass hits that we have built from our library, that we either use, in this case, I think we're using Contact, or Massive for that. And let's see, I think that's Massive. That's Massive as well. But our main bass line, which I'm going to come to right here, and see here, is when we did this, we didn't have Contact for Pro Tools, but now we've got it, but we were using this Patchwork. Patchwork is a great little plugin that brings in other plugins to platform that doesn't support certain plugins. For instance, now Pro Tools. So Pro Tools brings in VST and audio units into tools, and we can use them. And it's really, really cool. The library is not loaded because we haven't got the external drive with us. But here just shows we got 3 different patches from a library that we built over the years. And it's like a top bass and a low bass and a mid bass that we put together to have different characters to the actual sound, to the final sound. So if you take the main sound here, if you go down there, just unsolo just that, or solo this. So this is the wavy bass line that we did. As you can probably hear, is very processed. And this is the different sounds. If you just solo one of the sound, that's just one top sound. And then we got the kind of the lower end. That's the lower end. And then we got the kind of the MIDI kind of sound. Together, they make that particular bass sound, basically. And they all come from a root, C root, put together. From there, it goes through a L2, waves. Just try to literally pull up the level and flatten everything out as high as possible. Then we just got a nice little touch of 30 hertz because you don't want anything kind of interfering below 30. And then we got actually quite unusual little plugin. It's called PM. I think it's called Plugin Mix.
Plugin Mix.
And the plugin itself is called Loud Bass. And it's very difficult to get nice warm bass with digital platforms. And what this does, again, adds a harmonic distortion to whatever frequency you want it to work with. It goes from 60 hertz all the way up to 500 hertz. And I always tend to take it down to 60 hertz because that's the nicest and warmest feel. And if you play it, if you listen to decent pair of headphones, you probably can hear the difference when you bypass this. Adds that really nice bottom end, gives that warm feeling that in many cases it disappears when you're working in Logic or Pro Tools or even Ableton Live. And from there on, we're moving to again, mag. And I'm emphasize the frequency around 10 to just poke out that kind of high notes in the mix. Not too much, it's just about 5 dB, and everything else is pretty neutral. It's just that kind of high mid. And then another really, really good little plugin. It's actually for free from Softube. And they do, it's a very, very basic, again, it's just a saturation knob, which you can do in 3 different phases: high, neutral, or low. And in this case, we're using low, and just a few dB up, and just adds, again, more character to the sound. It just add that little warmth touch for it. If you unmute it, it's just a bit too clean. And if you put it on, it just add that little, it's not distortion, but it's just a little bit of saturation. Again, it's very similar to the decapitator that we use. It's a bit nice, it's not as aggressive, but it just adds character to the sound. So if you want a little bit dirtier kind of flavor to drums or even vocal, it's a great little free plugin that you can download from Softube. And then I'm sure many people have seen this, is from Waves Factory. And what it does, we feed the kick. So the kick is side changed into this processor. So what this does, it analyzes the kick's frequency, and it automatically deducts this with the amount of dB you want here. So you've got a ratio all the way from 0 to 100, and we always tend to put it around here. But what it does, you can see the blue signal is kind of the kick, and here you see what it is actually deducting and making room for the bass. So this really frees up the frequencies in a mix and kills that frequency in the bass, making room for the kick drum. So the kick drum really, really pokes through. You could put this on anything bass heavy sounds, basically. And it's a great help to the mix when it comes to the bass. Okay, so that's pretty much what we got on the bass sound, the main bass sound. We've got a little bit of room, small room straight on the bass. Again, just give that little space to kind of place it slightly different in the actual mix to make room for other drums and vocals. To complement that bass sound, we got some kind of talk box that together. So 2 other bass sounds to complement the main bass line. Again, we are running that on Massive, and I think we have those, not bypass, we want that completely gone, that's gone, there we go. And it's like a plucky bass that we created in Massive. I think Massive is still a pretty decent plugin. I know there are many other out there now, and Massive kind of was big in a few years ago, but we still use it a lot. I think it's a great little sounding synth that we use on a frequent basis. Okay, so those are all the 3 complementing bass sounds that we have together, the main bass line coming to the whole sounds like that. You got the kind of answers coming back there. And all those 2 bass sounds are playing out from Waves and not Waves, sorry, Massive. So in this session, normally we do buses. So if these are the 4 bass sounds that we got running, normally we do a bus to a sound that you signed certain EQs and compressor to make that kind of package sound good. But in this particular mix, we got it on all separate channels because you can process, obviously the processing power on the computers are so good these days, you can afford putting a lot of plugins on each channel. As before, bus was a great way of saving DSP by just busing stuff and putting many EQs and compressors on one channel, or even putting them together. But now we can afford having all on different channels, basically. So processing the other bass channels pretty much with the same way. that we did on the main bass line. Again, lifesaver is this Waves Factory, the track spacer, which is great. And then we use the saturation knob a lot, again, on pretty much all the other bass sounds. And again, this one has got a lot of hall and wet on the actual mix. So it's all about balancing between the EQs, the bit of reverb, and the saturation knobs to give that really nice sound with the basses. And let's see, if we move on to the mix, we've got a couple of other sounds here. We just got a one note string line in the breakdown. It's just a basic one note string, quite buried in the mix, to give that kind of suspense feeling. It's run by the same guys that do Boom. It's called Expand 2. It's a German manufacturer, Air, and they only used to be Pro Tools, but now they do for platforms. Again, it's very, very basic, but a very, very efficient kind of little software synth, and it's one of those synths that have pretty much all sounds. So if you looking to get a really basic one strings or trumpets or all pianos and whatnot, they got pretty much everything in there. I tend to use this mainly for some drums, some percussions, and some strings. It actually sounds pretty decent, the strings in this machine. So in this particular case, it's just a one note string, can't get any simpler than that. Yeah. So basically, you start with the synth, obviously, a bit of compression. We actually got two compressions, one being the smack with the side chain from the kick, so giving that kind of pump feel. And then we got one knob made by Waves, again, give that pump feel. So it's a like artificial kind of pump that you get without really compressing the sound. Very, very basic, very, very simple to use. It's very efficient, very good. This reverb, drenched in reverb, a lot of hall, large hall, 14.5 seconds, so very, very, wet, not vet. That sounds very Swedish. Wet. So that's kind of cool. And what else we got? And then we got in the breakdown, we got these kind of high octave bass notes. Again, we're using all the bass sounds apart from our own build from Contact. We used it from Massive that we created ourselves in our own libraries, basically. And let's see, what's this? This is it's a kind of a cool little sound. It's coming from Massive as well. Massive. So there's a lot of Massive going on here. Yeah, that's just from our libraries as well. Let's move on to the vocals. So that's pretty much the drums and the bass, how we make it work together. As you can see, it's pretty slim line, everything from the bass to drums. So a lot of compression, a bit of EQing, and side changing on the bass to get that room for the mix. When it comes to the vocal, in this particular session, we had Wiley doing one verse. This is the VIP mix on Wavy. So we got Wiley, Alika, and then Double S on the third last verse. So obviously on separate channels, because we treat them completely differently depending on the character of the vocal and whatnot. Wiley did record his version in his own recording studio, so he actually processed his vocal quite a lot before he actually sent it over to us. So he obviously uses his own engineers, his own mics and whatnot, so we don't know exactly what went down on his recording studio. But so we've done quite basic. We're cutting around 85 hertz. We're putting a peak reduction, not really compressor, but it's more like a limiter. The BF3 is pretty much the same thing in Waves and the audio units ones. So if we
these waves and I'm the pioneer, I can get a vibe right here, right there.
So his vocal is quite bright, so he's probably processed his vocal quite a lot before. So we kind of keeping it quite slim on this particular vocals. We just to do some de-essing, some compression, and some cutting off on the low key. When it comes to the vocals we recorded, we gone a little bit more processing on that front. So we're cutting anything, depends if it's a male or female rapper or singer, depends where you feel comfortable cutting. Anything from 180 hertz all the way down to 40, 50, 60 hertz if you want to keep that bottom end or not. On this case, Alika, the main featuring artist, we're cutting her around 105 hertz. Then we're using Pro Compression, which is Proto's own compressor. And nothing too crazy. You can see we're only doing about 4, 5, 6 dB ratio compression. Not too much. But again, here's the decapitator. Not much drive, but just give that a little bit extra flavor to the vocal, to give that little bit of roughness to it. Sometimes when you record a vocal in the studio, you get that perfect sonically sounding vocal, which in many cases is great. But if you want to do something a bit dirty, a bit grittier, decapitator does a lot of that work for you to kind of get a bit of grit. De-esser by Fab Filter, which I think is one of the best de-essers out there. I used to use Sony Oxford a lot, but this is a very, very nice, smooth de-esser, and you can actually hear the frequency you want to work on, which is quite cool, and you can move it, the actual frequency band. You can actually expand it here, which is very, very handy if you want to work through different frequencies, and you can see where the actual de-esser is working, and and how much you're actually ducking it down. That's very, very handy. So a good Pro, if you want a good de-esser, it's a very good sounding one. So because we actually emphasize, and what I do after de-esser, sometimes de-esser can actually take a lot of the high frequencies off. So we tend to put back a few there, but that the S's is going to be much lower, but you can actually add a bit of frequency after the de-esser to make up for the lost de-essing you've done. So that's what we've done in this case here. And then we've got a bit of EQing. We're killing some of the frequencies that are just not really comfortable, sounding in the mix. Like especially around the 400 hertz, it's just one of those frequencies. Not really, it's not a nice frequency to listen to. So we've done a bit of EQing on her voice here, trying to remove some annoying frequencies. So what I normally do is to find those annoying frequencies, you just take the vocal you're working on, and then I tend to just go the opposite and narrow it down and just try to find the frequencies you don't like and just sounds unnecessary. And then when you found them, just poke them straight down, and then hopefully you'll fine tune the mix you're trying to achieve. So that's the main lead vocal with Alika. And then to support her, so obviously the first verse is completely naked and it's only her doing the first 8 bars. And then the second time around, the next 8, she's supported by a few backup. So literally a tracking of the actual, the main lead. And, some cases, depending on singers and rappers, or they're very tight or less tight, we use vocal line to kind of just tighten things up. So in some cases, if you take a lead that you're very, very happy with, and then you do some tracks and then you kind of feel it a bit, they're not 100% in time or whatnot, I always tend to use the vocal line to get, those tracks 100% lined up. So I'm just showing an example here. So in this case, that's the lead. And if you want to have a dub or a track that needs to match exactly, here's a very good way of, putting it exactly spot on. So we use this a lot when we're working on tracks or BVs to go with the main lead vocal. It's a great little tool. It's called Vocal Line. They do different types. This is the basic version, but it's very efficient. Vocal Line project, and it's available for all platforms, which is quite handy. In terms of the tracks we've got, so we pan obviously a couple of them. One is actually exactly copy of the lead or track, and that's very processed in a very similar way. Not so much processing when it comes to the decapitator. That's a bit, leave that for the master or for the main lead. And then we've got the support one a little bit less affected, and then we have the 2 BVs a bit further down in the mix, quite panned left and right to give that bit more stereo spread to the actual take itself. But when it comes to reverb, we got just one reverb channel, and we're using 1 and 2, which is this one here, and it's called Reverb 1, and it's made by Pro Tools themselves. Again, if you're using Logic or Ableton, it's not rocket science when it comes to this. It's just a basic, a hall, and it's got in this case actually a room with about 500 milliseconds, bit of dip on the high frequencies. It's just to give that, tightness. The reason we use a lot of room and ambience in this mix is because it's a quite tight sounding record. So you don't want to have a too long sounding reverb because it will feel a bit too, too roomy, and not too roomy, too kind of decayed, the vocal, and it's not going to sound good for the mix. So we're only using, as I said, the lead and one track and 2 BVs for Alika's vocal. Moving on to double S's, which is the third and last verse for this record. We recorded it here in our studio, so we got a fair amount of processing going on. So again, one, B3A, limiter, and then the good old EQ, cutting at 102 hertz, boosting a little bit of low end. We just wanted to give a bit more warmth to his low end. Nothing too special on the high end at all. We're using the Mag EQ to boost that air I was talking to you before. That 40,000, 5 dB just gives that kind of more roomy air. And a bit of, again, sometimes we use another compressor at the end of the chain to just compress everything we just done at the end. And that, to round it off, we got just a little de-esser to just poke those S's down. Because on digital format, especially when you listen to some headphones and stuff, that S's can be very nasty for your ears. So that's the kind of the verses, not crazy processed. When you're dealing with rappers, we want to keep the character of the sounds as original as possible. When we're working on more kind of sung vocals, we treat the vocals a bit more with EQs and compressions. Here we got the main wavy hook line, which is tracked quite substantially. So this is the main the ads that Wiley did on the main hook line, and then we got Wiley's lead in the chorus, and then we got Alika's tracks here. So as you can see, it's quite a lot of tracks going on to give that fullness in the chorus. And this is all the tracks assigned to a bus. So we assign all these tracks down to one bus to make it obviously nice and simple. But in each track, we have just a compressor and a bit of cutting in the bottom end. And on the actual end bus, we got, again, nothing special, just a compressor. And then because we got EQs going on each track. So it's nothing special. It's the reason is to try to make it as full as possible by using as many tracks as possible, panned in quite a different positions, as you can see, everything to extreme to kind of the kind of halfway or even centered in this one to give that fullness, but at the same time quite spacious feel to the vocals in the chorus. And those are quite low in the mix, while the main lead is obviously the lead part of the vocal. And then we got a few haze and ad-libs at the end here at the very bottom of our mix. Some of them are more processed than others. Let's see on this too. So just kind of smooth. And then I think on this one we got quite a lot of quite a long reverb on this to give that kind of lacy kind of feel to it. And the plugins we use for that, again, the Capitator, back in business there with the de-esser. So as you can probably see, we tend to go back quite a lot to the same plugins. So the plugins we use a lot is cutting a lot of bass from most of the sound that doesn't need to have bass. And then we're using like a limiter or small compression. And the Decapitator use that quite a lot to kind of give a lot of grit to the sounds, de-essing on everything that needs removing of the S, obviously on the vocals, and then kind of brightening it back up. or anything that needs brightness. This can be used on anything from vocals to synths or bass lines or whatever. I use that a lot. And the Sony aux4 to poke those nasty frequencies out. And then again, a compressor to kind of finish off the job. I mean, if you look on most of the channels, that's a repeating pattern for us. As I said, it doesn't necessarily need to be Pro Tools plugins. It could be anything that is exactly pretty much the same as Pro Tools. But most of the plugins that we use are available for any other platforms out there. When it comes to the final mix, we actually done a stem mix on this. So what we do, we group all the kind of the drums, apart from the kick drum. The kick drum we always leave out by itself, and then we use all the drums, so snares and kicks, and not kicks, sorry, the claps together in one stereo bounce. And then we do the same thing with the bass, and the same thing for the effect sounds, and the same thing with the vocals. And we actually mastered that at the mastering studio. This again from Plug and Mix. It's been around for years, but it's just the harmonics sounds very, very good in this plugin, especially on the high end. If you want to just add that nice little top frequency at the end, it's a great little plugin to add those frequencies. Anything above 5,000K all the way up to 20,000, and it just adds that nice tube exciter effect. I think there are many plugins doing very similar jobs, but this in particular I think sounds good. So we use the PM for excitement on the high end and the bottom end on the bass, as I showed you earlier. And I'm sure everybody have seen this, the Ozone. We've been using this for many years, and it's just a great sounding little mastering plugin. To be honest with you, we haven't done anything in this apart from the limiter, or the maximizer, should I say, is because we did master this record elsewhere. Otherwise, we would have gone in town a bit more in depth on the compression, on the EQ and stuff like that. So at the moment, we literally just got it set to 7 dB, on the maximizer to give that nice push on volume, basically. The trick is when we start doing the mix is obviously make the mix as good as you can in the stereo file, as happy as you are. The mastering obviously is great, but if you can get the record sounding as good as you can without adding any compression and any EQing, that's the goal. And then just adding obviously volume to it because you want it nice and loud, especially for dance music. But that's for the general rule I've got, is just try to keep the EQing and the compression to the minimum, and try to make the main mix sounding as good as possible before you add the master channel. But as, again, we use this a lot. So that's the kind of the master thing that we use for this track. But as I said, we did a stem mix on the mastering studio, so we haven't got much to tell about that side.
So that's all we got time for today. We've dissected how we did Wavy. We've given you all our tips and tricks. Let's see if you can recreate it, and if you can, make sure to send it over to us or let us hear it. Please catch us on all of our social networks. Instagram, we're under official CLiQ. On Twitter, it's CLiQ. And on Facebook,
Click. I don't know where we are.
Also, don't forget, we got our new record out, Dance on the Table. Make sure to go and grab a copy of that. It's got some great remixes on there. It's doing its little thing. And we've got a bunch more music coming.